We often overestimate what we're capable of in a short amount of time, and underestimate what we're capable of with hours, weeks, or years of work and experience. This single fact is what prevents a lot of people from doing just about anything. Whether it's going to the gym, or starting a business, or trying to learn an instrument, or just doing hard things that don't immediately reward you for going through the process. Some people play games to relax, others play them to socialize with their friends, and a certain demographic of people play games for a challenge, where they're full-on expecting to suffer. Sekiro is a prime example of the latter. Sekiro is of course made by fromsoftware, who have become notorious for creating some of the hardest games out there. Every Souls game, Elden Ring, Bloodborne, games that are really good but can also be really difficult. I've played every single one of them, and somehow they've managed to sneak their way into becoming my favorite games ever made. But why is that? What is so enjoyable about dying over and over and over and over and over again? I can almost guarantee you that everybody who has ever touched one of these games have gone from having a good time to blind rage in the blink of an eye. This blind rage is what causes people to give up. They quit, never to return, and in reality, at one point that was me. Sekiro was my first Souls-like game, and anybody who has played it knows that it's very, very different from all the other ones. But surprisingly, despite the constant and repetitive crash outs I had trying to brute force my way through the game, eventually leading me to give up on it, I'm almost glad it went this way. In virtually every other game created by FromSoft, you have options. That's what gives them life. Of course, the games have a general idea of what they want you to do and how to progress through it, like doing hour-long quests to unlock gated weapons, venturing back and forth to different areas trying to exhaust every single line of dialogue from different NPCs. But in the end, if you really, really wanted to, you can always find a great sword early on, find a nice comfy spot near a bonfire to farm souls for a few hours, spam every single level into strength and vigor, and then go on and trivialize any boss that shows up. That's just one way to play the game. Souls games are hard, but there's almost always some way out. There's items in every game that, when you combine them all together, leave you with an absolutely busted build. That pursuit in itself can be very gratifying when it all pays off. But what if you didn't have this way out? What if you found yourself at a brick wall, constantly bashing your head against it without making any progress, and being forced to find a way through, despite all of that? That is precisely the embodiment of what Sekiro is. There are no other options. You simply must master the art of getting good. When I first played this game, I genuinely had no idea what to expect from it. I thought it'd be something like Ghost of Tsushima. How different could they really be? Which, looking back now, is really funny. But anyway, that clearly didn't work out for me. I remember running up to most enemies, just spamming the right bumper trying to kill anything in my way, and surprisingly it managed to work for longer than it should have. The first roadblock that people face, if you want to call it that, is the Chained Ogre. It's the hello world of Sekiro boss fights. Something to show you the ropes, if you will. You'll have to time your attacks, react quickly to his grabs, dodge some flying kicks, and practice trying not to get too greedy. Sometime after that you'll reach Gyobu, and while his yelling can be intimidating, he alone isn't too terrible. There's some moves he'll do where he'll swing his weapon at you pretty aggressively, but nothing that you can't just run away from. You don't need to be perfect, you just need something that resembles a strategy. Get a couple hits here, dodge a few attacks, maybe throw some shurikens that you probably forgot you had until now. You can make it work, and the first victory feels good. You'll come across the Blazing Bull, and again, you can scrape by. For the first few hours, you can honestly just scrape by. After all, you're just trying to have fun playing the game. You're doing what you can. And it's working. But by now you've noticed some things. There's openings in every fight. I'm a samurai. The game wants me to be aggressive, right? I'm trying my hardest to attack them, but nothing is really landing, and when it does, my HP gets cut in half just seconds later. Why am I being punished so hard? Now, in times like this, it's important to step back, see what you're doing wrong, and try to reassess your approach. I, unfortunately, am not that level-headed all the time. Once I reach this point of frustration, I almost have to prove a point to myself that I can indeed do anything however I see fit. But Sekiro doesn't give you that luxury. You're almost forced to play the game the way they want. There's more to it than simply roll, attack, roll, attack. Eventually, I hit that wall. After a few hours of playing, you'll find Juzo, and funny enough, out of every single boss I encountered along the way, this was where I eventually gave up and quit the first time I played. I don't normally quit games unless I really truly hate them. I remember getting really annoyed at what I considered inconsistencies in the playstyle. Why do I have to fight every boss in a different way? Some bosses I need to attack and then block, and then other bosses I need to almost exclusively poke and prod them to death. Why do I need to clear out like 20 different enemies during a boss fight anyway? This game clearly doesn't know what it's trying to be, and I'm done. Unfortunately, I think this is probably a course a lot of people take, and they never fully see things through to the end. Getting stuck in games can be really, really annoying. It's like you're being tortured in a way by your own inadequacy. The inability to just beat a boss in a video game. The inability to just press the right sequence of buttons in order. Something that seems so simple can be so difficult. Again, Sekiro can be brutal for this exact reason. There is no way out, only through. And me? Well, I'm stubborn, and the idea of this game getting the better of me didn't really sit right with me, and so eventually after some time had passed, I came back to give it another shot. I came back, killed all the enemies probably another 10, 20, 30 times, I can't even remember. But I eventually beat Juzo, and it gave me a bit of confidence. Confidence that was almost immediately shut down by Lady Butterfly. I remember screaming at this woman for what felt like hours, spamming attacks, watching her deflect them right in my face, trying to dodge her doing backflips and then diving right into me, then going into the second phase where I'm running away from these clones for what felt like years of my life that I would never get back. But again, with enough grit and pure stubbornness, I won. But part of me knew something still wasn't quite right. My suspicions were correct. On my way back through Ashina Castle, you'll eventually meet Jinsuke. He's just a dude sitting in a room inside the castle. In the grand scheme of things, he's nothing. He basically does a single attack the entire fight. But what Jinsuke forces you to do is something I was grossly underestimating the entire game thus far. He attacks so fast you almost don't have time to react. You can't dodge, you can't jump over it. You get cut down almost instantly. But if you look closely, there's a flash. A quick blink before you're murdered. You might think you don't have enough time to react, but this flash is almost perfectly timed to compensate for your own reaction time. And with a simple double tap of the left bumper, you're alive. This gave me a glimpse into the future, an alternative path I could go down, one where I'm not coming up with covert tactics to try and win a fight, but playing the game they wanted me to play all along. See, not everything was about pure aggression. What I was failing to remember was the one thing that sets this game apart from all the others. The parry. See, the game is very deceptive and almost makes you forget that it exists. At the beginning, it allows you to get through a fair bit of it without even using the mechanic at all. The chained ogre doesn't even need to be deflected. You really just attack, dodge, and kill it that way. It gives you this false sense of accomplishment. It makes you feel like you're making progress, and you are, but not in the right way. It's like there's two paths, one of brute force that leads to a dead end, and the other path which leads you to victory. You build these bad habits early on, which, when you inevitably get stuck later on, forces you to rewire your brain in another way, in the way you're supposed to play. Outside of a few fights, the game can almost be beaten purely by parrying. There's of course the traditional health bar that each boss or enemy has, and if you get that to 0, they're obviously gonna die. But what makes Sekiro special is the posture bar. is something that is in every single Souls game as well. In something like Dark Souls or Elden Ring, if you hit a boss enough times within a small window, you'll stagger them, leaving them open to a critical hit. But that posture meter isn't obvious, it's hidden. It's some internal number that, once passed, activates that stagger. In Sekiro, however, it's the center of attention. It's front and center at the top of the screen. It's in front of you all along, and yet it often goes unnoticed by people playing it for the first time. And not only do the enemies have posture meters, but you have one yourself. If you just block attacks lazily, you can block damage and your health won't really go down. And this is a step in the right direction, but not the entire solution. Eventually, if you make enough mistakes, your posture breaks, and you're opened up to their attacks for a short period of time while you recover. This one mechanic is what turns the game from just any other brain-off, swing sword, do big damage kind of game into something that, to me, is genre-defining. Something that is consistent from the first few minutes of booting up the game all the way until the end of the game is the presence of Genichiro. He's the first boss that you run into, and 99.9% of the time that you encounter him for the first time, you're gonna die within like 10 seconds. Before you can really even realize what's going on, the fight's over, and Wolf loses his arm. You probably won't think about it beyond that, and probably be glad that it's a scripted moment. But the fact remains that the fight was over before it even started. You didn't stand a chance. But for once, you get an out. You'll probably forget about it. Until now. At the top of Ashina Castle, you'll meet Genichiro for a second time, but this time, you fight him for real. If you've cheesed your way through the game up until now, props to you, but this is what I and many others would consider to be the first true skill check. The fight to me is the embodiment of what Sekiro is truly about. The game forces you to finally grow up, to stop taking the cheap ways through, and to finally gain control over yourself. Games like these are fast, sometimes almost too fast to keep up with, and that can be overwhelming. You're spamming inputs trying to convince yourself that you know what you're doing, but it doesn't need to be that way. You need to slow down. At the end of the day, somebody made this game, and games like these are meant to be conquered. There's just something you're missing. This Genichiro fight caused me to finally understand what kind of game Sekiro truly is. And it changed everything. It's not just an action game, it's not strictly a Souls-like. Sekiro is a rhythm game. You as a human have flaws, and so does your gameplay. You're not going to play like a robot, perfectly refuting everything in front of you the very first try. But fortunately, the bosses you're up against are more robotic. Their moves are scripted, and with enough inspection, you can decipher this script into something more manageable. Something that isn't a flurry of visual attacks on your screen, but a tempo in your head that you internalize. Genichiro is the first boss that almost requires you to go through this process. When I reframed this in my mind, the game opened up to me. I was no longer trying to brute force my way through it, something that was barely working to begin with. I was, in almost every sense of the term, aiming to achieve flow state. There's absolutely nothing more satisfying than hearing the clangs from every perfect parry completely nullifying a combo that used to completely demolish you. Something that used to cause your blood pressure to spike through the roof can be something that you do on autopilot. This feeling, this approach to the game, is what I believe FromSoft executed perfectly. This is what they wanted you to experience. To put in the work, to practice, to excel, to get good, and reap the rewards from it. Playing games defensively was never my favorite thing to do, which is why the best defense is offense. That's why Sekiro is so enjoyable for me. Even when you're playing defense by parrying, you're making offensive progress. They found a way to make what is generally the more boring parts of fights into something more enjoyable than the core fighting itself. And this makes sense when you really think about it. In Sekiro, there aren't really any weapon upgrades, there aren't any other swords or weapon types that you can use. There's just the sword you start with, and it's there from the beginning to end. Yes, there's prosthetic upgrades like the firecrackers or the axe or the umbrella, but the core weapon, your core way of dealing damage, isn't necessarily swinging the sword, but deflecting with it. To me, this was insane. It was something that me, as a stubborn idiot, hadn't considered. That there could be more than one way to win. The game, despite misleading you at the start, slowly teaches you the style as you play. When you stumble upon Enshin on the way to Lady Butterfly, the critical pierce attacks are enough to almost one-shot you. It's only then when you realize that Makiri counter is a thing, and you can directly dash into those attacks dealing massive posture damage. When you see Jinsuke in Ashina Castle, and you practically kill him without really attacking, just parrying. It slowly unwraps all these different mechanics before you, giving you more ways to play, not less. It has a few core mechanics that can take you all the way through the game, and it's up to you to prove your worth and how you utilize them. Every boss was like its own song and a rhythm game that you have to fully clear to win. At the end of the day, it truly was just a skill issue all along. The difficulty is what makes victory so sweet. Overcoming these gargantuan tasks set before you that repeatedly push you to the edge of your sanity. And if you do this for long enough, call it insanity if you will, but you actually start to enjoy it. You start to crave it in a way. It's proving to yourself that you are capable of getting good. The biggest test you will face in Sekiro is your final battle. It's the culmination of hours of effort, blood, sweat, and tears, maybe some of those things literally. Genichiro returns once more, but now you're more than equipped to handle him. What at first destroyed you without you even realizing what was going on, what forced you to learn the core mechanics of the game, is now but an appetizer for the best and perhaps most difficult fight in the entire game, Sword Saint Ishin. The fight demands perfection. There's very little room for error. A full phase of Genichiro every time you step foot in the arena, then 3 different phases consisting of different weapon types and fighting styles. You have to be the best, you have to conquer your nerves, and you have to use the experience of your struggles to beat this boss. It's a battle of endurance. Your patience tested, your skills tested. The entire game's a crescendo leading up to this very fight. It can be pretty brutal. My first time playing through Sekiro, I sat there for hours trying to beat Ishin. No matter what I did, I kept making these little inaccuracies that turned into bigger errors, which of course got me killed over and over again. And when you're sitting there for hours on end, you're gonna get annoyed, which doesn't really make anything better. I eventually gave up for the night and told myself that I'd try again the next day. I remember getting on, booting up the game, and my heart sank. My save got corrupted. I was there, I had done it all, I was at the final battle, and it was all just taken away from me. If the game itself wasn't frustrating enough, this was the icing on the cake. And then there was a moment. Yet again, I had 2 paths. I could just let it go. I had already quit the game once before, why not do it again? I basically beat the game anyway. Or I could restart from the beginning and do it right this time. And that's exactly what I did. And I think that's what ingrained this game into my memory. You'll realize that the things that were holding you up before were hardly roadblocks. You're equipped with everything you need, and you always were. The game just had to show you what you were truly capable of. When you're fighting Ishin, every single time you die, and you're going to die, he'll say just one thing. Hesitation is defeat. Beating him by slowly chipping away at his health isn't really going to cut it. You have to be aggressive. The same thing that got me killed hundreds of times earlier in the game, the same thing that I had to unlearn, was now the key to my success. I had to combine both my own degenerate brute force technique with my newfound knowledge of utilizing the skill and precision of parrying to get through it all. Years later, this phrase still sticks with me. It's burnt into the back of my brain. It's very easy to hesitate with such large obstacles in front of you. It's natural to doubt your ability. But why do that? You often know exactly what you need to do, you just need to execute. I think that line itself caused a big change in me as a person. That line, combined with the suffering and anguish I went through playing this game for the first time, was, as weird as it sounds, a transformative experience for me. I had so many times where I could have just given up. And I did. But I always came back. When the odds are stacked against you so hard, you have no choice but to give it your all. And if you're good enough, you'll prevail.